We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio. Earlier we talked Joe Biden's lame duck presidency and the future soul of the GOP. But let's not forget those poor Democrats who've had 2 years living high on the hog, unfettered in their legislative agenda. But now the purse strings may be somewhat curtailed. Who's going to bail them out, Scott?
Mark, it always comes down to the people, whether it's through one layer of taxation or another, or the taxation of businesses that the people ultimately fund through their consumerism. All the money for all the stuff always comes out of our pockets.
And Tim, so is Joe Biden's vision for America dead in the water, legislatively speaking?
Well, I think considering he acted after 2020 like he had won like an FDR level landslide, he legislated or he governed or he presided like that. I mean, they won the barest majority in both the Senate and the House, and yet they came forward with radical proposals that were entirely antithetical to what they had run on in 2020, and somehow the voters did not punish them for it in 2022. So, you know, Biden's vision basically is an America without Trump. That's about it. He's a career politician who has never had what George H.W. Bush used to call the vision thing. He's a transactional politician who basically represented a radical party in 2020. Now in 2022, he's tried his best to get through trillions in new spending. He succeeded in stoking inflation, but now no, he does not have any ability to push that through. He has said, and basically he's doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on it, and he'll say it again. His goal in life is to rid the country of Donald Trump. And if he does that, he will have accomplished what he hoped to. And that's proven more than enough for Democrats up to now, apparently.
Yeah, we saw that with some of his first acts in office was to take down elements of the Trump legacy. And of course, some of them he's had to kind of rebuild back in what he calls a better way.
You mean like the wall?
Yeah.
Yes.
Who would have thought that?
Never go back to building the wall. And yet he did.
But it's in a humane and compassionate way that respects, you know, the legacy of colonialism and gender identity
and trans rights,
in a non-binary fashion is how it's being built now, Tim, not in a hateful binary way like Donald Trump wanted.
Well, he could have just finished the whole wall and sprayed it, you know, in rainbow colors or something, and surely everyone would have been happy.
Yeah,
literally everyone would have been satisfied with that, I'm sure. Now, Graham, during the campaign season, Joe Biden, he said that if the American people gave him 2 more senators, he would get busy with everything. And I do want to go into what this everything is later, but presumably he meant that by getting the 2, he could ditch trying to rally Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Now we don't know the full makeup of the Senate yet, but it seems that even if Raphael Warnock does prevail in Georgia, Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden, they still can't scrap the filibuster, can they?
Well, I'm sure they will try, but I don't think they'll be successful in doing it.
They don't have the numbers. Is that right?
Well, they really don't, and you know they're never going to get. I don't believe. I mean, I hate to imply that politicians sometimes say one thing and then completely change their mind, because we know that doesn't happen. But in this case, I don't see Joe Manchin ever kind of coming around on that. I really don't. I think he's kind of staked out his own personal. Like he picked that hill to die on, for want of a better term, was that he was not going to allow the filibuster to go down, and I think he will stick to that. So it's kind of really to me, there's no real change in how the Senate is going to do things. Whether or not, whether Warnock wins or whether Herschel Walker manages to pull it out, which, to be honest, personally, I think he actually will. But really, it's going to be business as usual in the Senate. And what I think we're going to see, basically, because Democrats are in for a really tough 2 years here in terms of legislation, I believe we're going to see Democrats frequently publicly kind of badgering Joe Biden to get out his phone and his pen and just legislate from the White House.
Well, it's funny you mention that, 'cause, I kind of expect to see Joe Biden and Senate Democrats pushing for something on Roe v. Wade. Scott, obviously since the Dobbs decision, it's kind of been dead in the water. He didn't have the opportunity to do it before the midterms to codify Roe v. Wade, as he said he was going to try and get done. That's completely out of the question now, do you think, or no?
Well, first of all, I think I have to just take a moment to discuss this notion of codifying Roe v. Wade. It's said
yes, please, yes,
all the time, like it's somehow possible to encode a judicial decision interpreting a lower court decision as law. That's not something that can happen. What they mean is that there are certain parts of the holding that they could pass into federal law, but the idea that you could encode it into federal law is just, I don't know who came up with that idea or why it's been so popularly sold as a way to discuss it, but it really does go like nails on the chalkboard for me. It doesn't seem like, they could do it with more Democrats in Congress than they have now. So why would they be able to do it with fewer? That doesn't seem to make sense to me. Also, for whatever reason, they've always refused to do it when they could actually get it done. Like Barack Obama said before he became president of the United States, that would be a priority for him. I don't know if he said like day one, but it was sort of that kind of language, like we're going to do this right away. He said that before, as you might imagine, groups of women who were campaigning for him on that basis. But then when he got into office, suddenly it became, not a priority. So I would just suggest, like, every time they have the power to do it, they don't. It's sort of like Republicans and really good anti-gun control measures. They talk about them, but when they can actually enact them, they're kind of more quiet on them. And Democrats seem to be the same way with this.
Well, what do you think, Tim? Is it more useful as a political threat to hold over, or as a promise to hold over election into election into election? As Scott says, Barack Obama promised it, didn't happen. Joe Biden's been promising, it hasn't happened yet. Do you think it's more useful to have it held out there as a carrot to encourage voters going forward?
Well, Mark, really the filibuster is the last vestige of the days when we weren't acting like there was some kind of civil war between the two sides, where they were so balkanized and so bitterly divided. It's the only thing that stops a strictly partisan passage of earth-shaking legislation. Let's go back to the founders. They wanted it to be very difficult and deliberative to make major changes in the law. They didn't specify a filibuster per se, but the way they designed the government was so that if we were going to do something really major, there had to be broad consensus. And the filibuster reflects that. And of course, the Democrats would love to get rid of it and to push everything through that they can. But, it's frightening, really, how close they came, because it was really only Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And it sounded to me like Sinema maybe possibly could have been talked out of it. Manchin couldn't. But boy, I'll tell you, every time that there was this push to get him to change, it sent chills up and down the spine to know what that would mean, the kind of radical left-wing socialist legislation that could have passed in the last 2 years were it not for the lone figure of Joe Manchin.
I'd like to just point out for the record, too, the founders were far less populist than we are. We now have direct election of our senators, and that was not part of the founders' vision. And if the states are the ones who pick the senators like they envisioned, it would even be more of a cooling period for these kind of big swings in legislation, I think. More cooler heads would prevail.
Food for thought indeed, Scott. Thank you. Now, Liberty Nation will be right back after this short break, asking whether the Fourth Estate is once again ready to resume its role as attack dog rather than cheerleader. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five.